thank you for the introduction and for
Welcome to
helping
Benedict.
organize this. Very grateful to be here and appreciate everything that you had to say by way of introduction, including introducing some of the folks who are here and have made time out of their day to welcome this stranger from far West Texas. Want to thank the students at Benedict and also Allen University who are here to engage with our democracy, not in support of a given candidate. A lot of days, a lot of months until we decide this election here in South Carolina. But I'm here to listen and to learn from you and gain the advantage of your perspective on the issues that are most important to this country. I also want to thank President Ardis, who I had the chance to meet when I first came in. We just had an amazing roundtable in which she participated. Extraordinary leader for this country right now. And I know it's got to be a point of pride that she is leading this institution at this moment. So I want to thank her in her absence for being here. Dr. Jeter, who welcomed me when we first pulled up, and as I was about to take the floor right now, showed me a picture that he had taken in my hometown of El Paso, Texas. And he took the picture up on Scenic Drive, and from this point, we're up in the Rocky Mountains in El Paso, Texas, in the Chihuahuan Desert, and you can see downtown El Paso. But you can also see downtown Ciudad Juarez, Chihuahua, Mexico. These two countries come together. They're joined, not separated, by the Rio Grande River. And as Jordan said, they form one of, if not the largest binational communities in the Western Hemisphere, if not the world. 3 million people from two countries speaking two languages who come together to form something far greater than the sum of their parts or the number of people involved. El Paso, Texas today is one of, if not the safest cities in the United States of America. And it is not despite, but because of the fact that we're a city of immigrants and asylum seekers and refugees, a minority-majority community that helps to tell and deepen and enrich the story of America. Why do I tell you all of this by way of introduction? In part because El Paso was the site, the city, of one of the largest massacres to have taken place in this country. And it happened just 3 weeks ago, on August 3rd of this year. Someone who was fueled and motivated and inspired by racism that has been unleashed by our current president, but pre-existed him by 396 years, the very foundation of this country, 400 years ago, August of 1619. The introduction of slavery to the British colonies to what would become the United States of America. After the Civil War and Reconstruction, the 13th Amendment, some people, based on the color of their skin and their ancestors' service against their will, in bondage, kidnapped and transported to this country, defining their futures and their prospects. A president who unleashes this openly and publicly in a way that I've never seen a president do in my 47 years on this planet, calling Klansmen very fine people, talking about immigrants as rapists, as killers, as drug dealers, as predators, as an infestation, as animals, not as human beings, which may explain how we kept kids in cages on the US-Mexico border in my community, kids who were fleeing some of the most violent countries on the face of the planet, traveling 2,000 miles on foot, sometimes atop a train known as the Beast, to come to this country at their most defenseless and vulnerable moment, taken from their parents who risked their lives to bring them here, put in cages. We, the people of this country, lost the lives of 7 of those children just in this last year. That doesn't happen by accident. It happens by design. When you dehumanize our fellow human beings, you give people in this country permission to treat them as something less than human. Hate crimes in America on the rise for 3 of the last 3 years. Muslims described as inherently dangerous. The president tried to ban all Muslim travel. All travel to this country by one people of one religion based on a difference that he believes to be defective or dangerous or disqualifying and has divided us. The day that he signed the executive order in 2017 attempting to ban Muslim travel to the United States of America, the mosque in Victoria, Texas, in my home state, was burned to the ground. Very clear signals being sent by our president. In May of this year, he's in Florida, holding one of these big rallies. He's talking about this invasion of immigrants. How are we going to stop them? Someone yells out, "Shoot them." The crowd roars In laughter and approval, the president smiles and laughs himself. That shooter who came to El Paso on August 3rd drove 600 miles, legally purchased an AK-47. This weapon was designed by the Soviets in the 1940s to kill people as effectively, as efficiently, and as great a number on a battlefield, not intended for civilian use. Though when his mother called the police in Allen, Texas, and said, "What in the hell is my son thinking? What does he need for this? He's not in the military, doesn't need it. You can't hunt with it. You don't need it for self-protection or defense in your home." The police said, "I'm sorry, ma'am, perfectly legal to do this in this country." Right before he begins his act of terror in a Walmart in El Paso, he publishes a manifesto talking about an invasion of Hispanics. The word that the President of the United States used talked about his anxiety that he would, as a white man, be replaced in this country by people who were not white, continuing a long tradition in this country, but giving voice to it and violence to it in a way that we have not seen, at least not in the modern history of the United States of America. This, I say, because if ever there were a moment where we are going to define ourselves and this country and the future of America, it is right now. Perhaps the best that can be said about our current president is that he has forced this choice and this decision for us, to us, with us, among all of us. I know that we are better than what we see at this moment, that we will be defined not by these acts of hatred or terror or racism, but the ways in which we overcome that. I know any illusion that I had as a white man in this country, that we were making progress on race because I didn't have to deal daily with the indignities of racism in this country, has been shattered at this moment. I'm beginning to understand it, perhaps only beginning to understand it, but I want to help make it right. I also want to address the other issues that affect our dignity in our lives, the ability to see a provider or a therapist or afford medication, to work a job and be paid a living wage so you don't have to work a second or a third job, the ability to afford to attend this institution in the first place, and then as you move forward in your life with your family, in your career, not be worried about paying back student loans, just focus on your choices going forward, improving yourself, and by extension, this country. Confronting climate change, an impending existential threat before it is too late and before it consumes all of us. I want to do all those things because they are the right things to do. I want to do all those things because if we fail to do them, if we fail our fellow Americans, we leave fertile ground for the kind of demagogues who are leading this country right now, who channel legitimate outrage and disappointment and frustration against the most vulnerable and against the defenseless in our communities and in our country. I want to make sure as president that instead of inflaming, we heal. Instead of dividing, we bring this country together, that every single child and every single family sees a future for themselves in the United States of America, and they're not counted down by race or religion or ethnicity or how many generations your family has lived here or whether you just got here yesterday. Before any of that counts, we are Americans first, and we have the chance to start treating one another in that way. That is why I'm running for president. That's why I came here today. That's why I'm looking forward to listening to you, your questions, but also as, or maybe more importantly, your ideas, your suggestions, your leadership right now at this defining moment of truth. Thank you all for having me out. Looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
Hey, how you doing? My name is Chris. I have 3 questions for you. That's all I have questions.
That's okay.
My first question is, what are you going to do about gun control?
Here's what I propose. Not only should we have universal background checks, which means anytime anyone takes possession of a firearm, you buy it online, at a gun show, at a gun dealer, at Walmart, where they still sell them, you go through a background check, and every loophole that we currently have is closed. So the boyfriend loophole, which says that if you were in a relationship with someone, but it was not a legal relationship, and they were beating you up, they threatened violence against you, right now that is not material to the background check. We don't check against that and prevent that person from owning a firearm. Close that loophole. The Charleston loophole, which led to the massacre at Mother Emanuel AME, which says that if we don't perform that background check within 72 hours, just take the gun and I hope that everything works out. close that loophole as well. But in addition, y además, we're gonna do this, red flag law, so that if someone is displaying a tendency towards self-harm, we lose 22,000 people to gun suicides in this country every year, or harming someone else, 40,000 total gun violence deaths in this country. We take that gun from them before it is too late. We stop selling AR-15s and AK-47s and weapons of war. And look, this is the hard part, because every Democrat would agree with almost everything I just said, but I think we need to take another step, and that is to buy back all of the weapons of war that are on the streets right now, the millions of AR-15s and AK-47s. And I understand some people, maybe some among us right here, own those weapons right now, bought them legally, use them responsibly. I cannot escape the conclusion that as long as those weapons are out there, they can be used to terrorize and to kill and to make people afraid based on who they are, those differences that I described earlier that should not define us. So that's my gun reform plan to save lives in this country. Give me your second question.
I'll prepare a response.
Thank you.
My next question is, what makes you different from the other candidates?
I'll take a stab at this one. There's a lot of us, right? A lot for you to choose from, and some people see this as a problem. If that's a problem, it's one of the best problems our democracy could have, that this many people from this many parts of the country with these varied backgrounds and biographies and skill sets are competing for your vote, this party's nomination, and the ability to take on Donald Trump in 2020 and then lead this country in 2021. Among them, I am the only one from the US-Mexico border at a time that the president is directing so much of his fury and hatred and lies at the US-Mexico border. The walls that he wants to build, the kids in cages, those parents sent back to their home countries. I think I can tell a very powerful, I hope a very compelling story about the fact that those immigrants in this community, in my hometown, in this country, make us stronger, make us safer, and make us more successful by their very presence. In Texas last year, and Jordan alluded to this, we went to every single one of the 254 counties in the state. No matter how blue I showed up so that I didn't take you for granted and heard your story. No matter how red, and we went to not the reddest counties in Texas, but the reddest counties on planet Earth, places like Abilene and Amarillo and King County. King County voted for Donald Trump 96% in the last election. But they are our fellow Americans, every bit as deserving of being respected, of being heard, of being fought for, of being served, and I have no ability to do that if I do not show up. And in that election, though I did not defeat Ted Cruz, we won more votes than any Democrat had ever won in the state of Texas history. Won independence for the first time in decades, won 500,000 Republicans, all of this on a proud, progressive agenda. And I showed up at places like Benedict College. My own team said, do not show up for young people, they do not vote. I said to my team, I would not vote either if no one showed up at my college, at my institution, listened to me and included me in the story. Young voter turnout in early voting in Texas was up 500% over the last midterm year. I believe, Chris, it will take that kind of movement, that kind of coalition to defeat Donald Trump in November of 2020 and then to bring a very divided country back together again in January of 2021. Thanks for that question. And then one more, right?
Yeah, my last question. What is your overall goal as president?
You know, I mentioned this moment of truth that we are in, and each of us has to face, at least if we're willing to not turn a blind eye or turn our back to it. I want this country to really live up to its potential and to fulfill its promise. We really, and I'm convinced by the 1619 Project, if you have not read it, please do on the New York Times website. This country began not in 1776, when we began with this foundational principle, at least I thought it was foundational, that all of us were created equal. It began in August of 1619, when we brought kidnapped people from West Africa to this country to do the work and build the greatness and build the success and build the wealth of this country. Folks who were kidnapped whose descendants would not be able to participate in that greatness and success. And really, still to this day, we have economic and educational and healthcare and democratic segregation in the United States, de facto, if not de jure. So, how do we live up to our full potential, fulfill that promise of all of us being created equal, set down in paper in 1776? First, it means telling the full, true, honest story of the United States of America, which we have absolutely, abjectly failed to do up into this point. When we include everyone at the table, everyone's lived experience, everyone's family's history in this, a richer, more honest understanding of America, we're going to begin to address things like the fact that there is 10 times the wealth in white America that there is in black America today. In a kindergarten classroom in Texas, a child who's 5 years old is 5 times as likely to be disciplined or suspended or expelled as a white child. That schoolhouse to jailhouse pipeline begins not in high school, begins in a kindergarten classroom, based on the stories that we tell about people who do not look like the majority in this country. Healthcare, we have a maternal mortality crisis in this country, 3 times as deadly for women of color. If we do not address these disparities, if we're not honest about what we're doing to our fellow Americans, we will never reach our promise or fulfill our potential. Fundamental to doing that is acknowledging it, being honest, telling the stories, and then creating policy with everyone at the table that begins to address that and ensure that we have equal opportunity for everyone in America. That's what I'd like to do for this country. Chris, thanks for asking. Appreciate it.
I actually have a question.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
As a historically black college, what are your takes on it, and what are your views on financial stability as far as students receiving grants and tuition grants from the states and Department of Education? What are your thoughts?
I think that HBCUs and minority-serving institutions are at a real crossroads right now. We know that their endowments are much smaller than those of private universities and public universities across the country for some of these same historical reasons that you have that great gap in wealth and income inequality in the United States of America today. I've heard about a paternalism in the kind of partnerships that big universities enter into with HBCUs, those big universities with all the leverage in the world, who skim the cream off of the contracts and the partnerships and leave much of the hard work to HBCUs. How do we meet this challenge? Under our administration, we will increase funding for HBCUs by $10 billion over the next 10 years. That's doubling current funding that we have right now. We will create a separate fund of $500 million a year for world-class teacher training academies at HBCUs and minority-serving institutions. I mentioned challenges in inequality and inequity in public education, that disparity in discipline in the kindergarten classroom. One of the best ways to meet that challenge is not only meeting the funding gap at minority-serving school districts, but ensuring that the teachers look like the students in front of them in that classroom. Only by creating that pipeline from HBCUs, like the one that we're standing in today, into those classrooms do we meaningfully begin to address the problem that we true economic growth, and also address a historical fact, which is that capital, wealth, was denied to black women and black men as a matter of redlining or segregation or Jim Crow for most of the history of this country. When I went to college, I took out student loans, but my dad also took out loans, but he could borrow against the value of his house that he owned. When we denied home ownership to black Americans, we also denied the seed capital for a college education at an HBCU, or starting the next great Microsoft or Apple or whatever the company is that will come out of the classrooms that we see here. So it's funding not only pre-K through 12 and that teacher pipeline, not just at the HBCU, but in the career and the success that we want to see afterward. Thanks for asking the question, Beto. Sir.
Hey, how you doing? My name is Nipuno Mware. I'm a senior. I'm from Nairobi, Kenya. I'm an immigrant student. You talked about Muslims and you talked about the Mexicans coming to the border. But there's a larger gap of immigration or immigrants per se. We have people from other countries, Asian countries, and those people specifically have been receiving harassment at airports per se. So what is the approach as president, what approach will you take to ease in this? And secondly, as students, immigrant students, it's very hard for us to even find internships per se because of the status we are in. I'm an F1 student, so if I apply for a position, it either says a US citizen or a permanent resident. There's no classification for an immigrant, and that knocks you out automatically. So what will be your approach to us like?
First of all, I think our posture has to be that immigrants represent an extraordinary opportunity to this country and not a threat to this country. Under this current administration, really, to be honest, under some previous administrations as well, maybe not to the same degree, immigrants were really looked at as a problem to be managed, a threat to be guarded against. You know, Donald Trump wants to build a 2,000-mile wall separating us from Mexico, but 600 miles of that wall were already built under the administration of George W. Bush and Barack Obama, because immigration and our connection to the rest of the world was seen as some sort of problem. The fact that you are here in this country, bettering yourself and the opportunity to better all of us by your very presence, we should be fighting for your decision to stay here, providing a legal permanent residency green card, and then waiving citizenship fees if you want to remain a citizen. And we should be humble enough to acknowledge that you may not want to. You may want to return to your home country and enrich that place instead of this one. But I want to compete for your talent and your genius, and I want it to be right here because you'll do well, but by extension, we as a country are going to do well. That's been the story of so much of our success for so long. And when we reject that or lose sight of that, we do so at our peril. So what are some of the things that we could do? For legal permanent resident or green card holders, there's 9 million in this country. Waive all citizenship fees, reduce the red tape and the backlog to speed their process to become US citizens. For those who attend universities, and that could be Benedict, it could be the University of Texas at El Paso, where we offer in-state tuition to students who live in Mexico. Let's find a way legally to encourage them to stay, and that engineering degree or that business degree or whatever they have earned, let's put it to use right here in the United States of America. Let's create channels, pathways for legal immigration if you want to work a job, come to school, or join your family that are safe, orderly, and quick. In some countries, to join family in the United States, you're in a line that stretches 20 or 25 years long. We produce an incentive to go around the law right now. Let's make sure that our laws match our values. And then to your point, wherever you are in the world, we are a people of the planet over, and that is the genius of the United States of America. We want to welcome you here, and we want you to feel welcomed when you come here, which has not been the case. I mentioned a rise in hate crimes every single one of the last 3 years. Pretty soon we are going to lose our distinction as the destination of choice for the people of the world, and we do that, we lose our greatness as a country. So those are some ideas to meet that challenge. Thank you. We'll go here, and then I'll come back to you after I've answered this question. Yes?
Okay, you briefly touched on this during your introduction. Minimum wage. We don't do it right in this country. We're one of the few developed nations, one of the few advanced nations in the world that doesn't increase the minimum wage on a regular basis. The cost of living is too high, minimum wage is too low. I see people, like you mentioned, working 2 jobs, but they still aren't making any meat. They only have 1 or 2 children.
Right.
Do you have a clear and concise plan to bring up the minimum wage either on a regular basis or bring it up to an amount that's gonna be able to put people through school, help people pay their mortgage? Because I don't know if the whole free college thing is gonna work out, per se. People need to be able to make money. People need to be able to provide their families. What's your plan for that? What are you gonna do about that?
$15 an hour for the minimum wage. That would be the base below which no employer could go. And then that would be indexed to inflation. To your point, we've been at $7.25. No one can meet the mortgage or the rent, put food on the table, raise their kids at $7.25 unless they're working 2 or 3 $7.25 jobs, which is the case for so many people in this country today. So $15, and then it continues to rise as inflation continues to rise in this country. Last year's wage growth on average across the country was 0.6%. $2 trillion tax cut to corporations who, instead of paying their workers more, bought shares back from their investors. But we need to do more. I mentioned universal health care, so that is not a function of luck or fate, which is something that you can count on. Primary health care, mental health care, and every woman making her own decisions about her own body and having access to the health care to make that possible. That ensures that you are doing better economically. We know so many families go into bankruptcy because they cannot afford medical debt. Paid family leave. So you want to take time off to take care of yourself or your parents or your child. Right now in this country, so many people cannot do that. And then women, especially African American women, paid 61 cents on the dollar. that a white man is paid for the same hours, the same work, the same value at the same employer in the year 2019. So ending the inequity and inequality that we see in the workplace, especially for women and women of color in particular. Latinas, I believe 53 cents on the dollar. That's an important step that we need to take. I think if we do all of that, then you have people who really can realize their full potential and promise. Right now, voting is a luxury if you work 3 jobs. Reading to your child before their first day of kindergarten, you cannot do that. You're on the bus to the second job. And you know what? In kindergarten, lots of kids starting at 4 or 5 years old, 10 months behind in reading comprehension because of that. They are gonna have a really hard time catching up down the road. So I see all these things connected, but $15 to your direct question. Thank you. And then I was gonna come here and then come back there. Yes, ma'am.
So earlier you mentioned confronting climate change. What are your plans to raise awareness on environmental health, especially to the millennial generation, because it's just not good right now. We're in a terrible state.
We are in a terrible state. And as you know, this is not some far-off prospect. It's happening in real time. Talking to the mayor of Charleston, every time it rains in Charleston, it floods in Charleston. It's going to affect some communities, some homeowners, some renters, more than it is others. In Houston, Texas, in my home state, 2017 Hurricane Harvey, 58 inches of rain fell just during one storm. That was the third 500-year flood in just 5 years. And some homeowners had not finished repairing their homes from the last flood before the next one hit. In minority-majority communities, we saw signs in yellow on every other telephone pole that said, "Sell your home for cash." So families that through generations had built equity in that home were selling those homes for pennies on the dollar under duress and distress from the effects of climate change. How do we meet this? We invest in the resiliency of communities, especially low-lying areas, and those communities that are closest to polluters. They're emitting toxins that cause cancers and multiple sclerosis and healthcare outcomes that are far worse for those who are closest to them. We also have to acknowledge the racial dynamic of this. Race is the best predictor of your proximity to a polluter in the United States of America, right? Some communities are bearing the brunt of this over other communities. And then in the long term, we've got to get this country off of a dependence on fossil fuels, fully embrace renewable energy, wind and solar, and the high-paying, high-skill, high-wage jobs connected with wind and solar in this country. If we do all of that, take leadership globally, not offer Brazil $20 million to fight forest fires in the Amazon, but take real leadership on re-signing the Paris climate agreements and helping Brazil and every country meet those challenges, then maybe, just maybe, we will meet our obligations to the generations that follow and address this issue of environmental justice that we have outstanding in this country. Thanks for the question. I was coming back to you.
Hello, hi. Okay, so one of the questions that I have is that looking at the debates from the previous months, I've seen a lot of the candidates really just dog Trump, and that's been the bulk of their argument. Now, as a young person getting into politics, how am I to decipher between, well, getting to know a candidate if the crux of their argument is just like trashing Trump? I understand that he's a bad guy, we got this, we understand that's the reason why you're running. So how do you as a candidate distinguish yourself to let others know what your policies are to understand, to allow us to make an informed decision?
Yeah. So perhaps in context of how I began the conversation with the consequence of this current president, you're asking what the alternative would be. So instead of inflaming communities with the kind of rhetoric he's used, I would want to heal communities. I would speak with pride about my hometown, about this community, about our country, that our differences should not be tolerated, should not be respected. They should be fully embraced. It is the only way we're going to make it. It's the only way we've ever made it as a country when we've had any real success. The policy specifics you've heard on healthcare and on immigration, I could offer to you on other issues, but my belief is that our best days and years are yet to come. I don't want to wall us off from the rest of the world. I'm not afraid of the future. I want to reflect the confidence and courage and the strength of America. But I also want to acknowledge that we've never allowed ourselves to fully realize that potential because of those who we have kept down in this country. So lifting those communities up, especially those that have been marginalized or locked out of the success or the gains or the greatness of America, is fundamental to my plan to our country achieving what it should be able to do. And then I also just offer you my perspective from where I'm raising my kids and where I was raised. From a state like yours, it's been written off as too red to count, but where we went everywhere, listened to everyone, included everybody in the conversation. That's my approach to leadership. It's why I'm here listening to you and answering your questions. But I will say this, and I said it at the outset because I think it's so important. There's never been a president like this one. There's never been a moment like this one. There's never been the chance that we're going to lose everything in this country, the way that we might lose everything in this country with this president. And having just borne that cost in El Paso, I wanted to make sure that you understood a little bit about where I'm coming from and what motivates me right now. But I appreciate the question. Absolutely. Yes?
Hello, my name is Marlo Thornton.
Hi.
I wanted to know, what are your plans regarding police brutality?
Question is about police brutality. What are our plans to address this? I was just listening to a woman who has a 6-year-old son, African-American family. And she said at the age of 6, she's having a conversation with her son that she should never have to have with a child of 6 years old. His innocence, his ability to enjoy his childhood changed forever because of the racism at work at every level in America, including in our criminal justice system, including in who is stopped and searched and frisked and arrested, who force is used against, and who is killed even when unarmed in America. We know this disproportionately affects black communities, black men, black women as well, and we have to stop it. So first order of business is ensuring that there's accountability and justice for how force is used and against whom it is used. If the local DA is unwilling to prosecute the police officer, then we make it a federal civil rights priority and bring in the United States Federal Department of Justice. We tie funding to sheriff's offices and police departments to transparent reporting of use of force, which we do not collect comprehensive data on in this country in 2019, despite everything that has happened so far. And then we make sure that we address the underlying legacies of slavery that are alive and well in America today, like the war on drugs that has become a war on people, that some have described as the new Jim Crow. We imprison more people than any other country on the face of the planet, bar none. They are disproportionately black and brown, many there for nonviolent drug crimes, like possession of marijuana, which is legal in most states in the country, but you can still be locked up in some of them for owning it. You are more likely to be stopped and searched for it if you are black than if you are white, though black and white Americans use marijuana at the same rate. And we also know, beyond the brutality that invites from law enforcement, being locked up constrains the choices and options that those who have been persecuted under this system will see. So ending the war on drugs, ending the federal prohibition on marijuana, expunging the arrest records of those arrested for marijuana, sends a signal to law enforcement that we will at least begin stopping criminalization of communities of color in America. We have to take many more steps, but I think that's a great place for us to start. Thanks for asking the question. Yes?
My name is Paige Hines. I'm a senior English major. My question concerns recession. I know it's on the rise, and it says millennials are the first to be destroyed. So what's your step on it if we do embark recession as we did back in 2008?
Yeah. I remember when I came back home my sophomore year or junior year of college, I had to declare my major, and I told my parents I was going to be an English major. And the look of disappointment on their faces of, Beto, you're taking out these loans, we're taking out these loans, why do you want to read books in college when you could be an engineer or an attorney or do something else? And what I've been able to tell them since then is it was one of the best choices I could have made. So English majors of the world unite. In the face of what may be a recession, and unfortunately we're seeing a lot of indicators, a lot of economists who tell us that we're headed that way, and understanding why we are headed that way. This erratic trade policy of the president, entering a trade war with China, levying tariffs on that country, that invite China to levy tariffs on America, which raise the cost of our goods that we consume here in this country, diminish the ability for farmers to find markets or workers to be competitive in the United States. There is ultimately a larger cost to pay, and it will be a recession if we enter one. How do we meet that challenge? We make sure that those, if it's the millennial generation or any other generation, that are hardest hit, are first in line for help. So unemployment benefits and extending those unemployment benefits if you lose a job as a result of the recession. If you have just graduated from college with an English major and you've graduated into a recession and cannot find that job, or forbearance on any student loan debt that you have incurred, or helping you or encouraging you to continue your education so you are even more competitive when the economy picks up again going forward. And then making sure that our investments are not in corporations who already have record bottom lines, who are already ensuring that their shareholders are doing just fine, but instead directing federal public investment in people, in communities, in unions, apprenticeships, the ability to learn a skill or a trade that you will command for the rest of your life, that will allow you to compete for a living wage for the rest of your life. These are some of the investments that we need to make now and certainly during a recession to make sure that we come out of that stronger for everyone, including those who are hardest hit. Thanks for asking. We have time for two more. I'll ask your question, then we'll take one on this side of the room.
Hey,
Yes.
my name is Trellin Thomas, and I'm a senior English major as well. And earlier you spoke about the minimum wage, but everybody knows that simply raising the minimum wage is not gonna really help too much, because if you raise the minimum wage, you're gonna have to raise the cost of living. So at that point, we're just gonna end up back where we started. So what would you do about the cost of living?
I might disagree humbly and respectfully with the premise of the question. I think that we've seen from states and cities that have raised the minimum wage that any fears of widespread job losses or losing affordability or quality of life were misplaced. That we can afford to pay people a real wage in America. I'll give you just one example of one industry. I was in Mississippi last week, which was the site of the largest single state ICE raid, Immigration and Customs Enforcement raid, in the history of this country. 700 people rounded up at chicken processing plants, working $8 an hour, $12 an hour, $12.50 an hour. Now, not accidental that those working those jobs were recruited from Guatemala and paid the bare minimum, some cases less than a minimum wage, with their immigration status used as leverage against them. It is because those employers, those corporations, are seeking the lowest possible wages that they can pay. Those same jobs, before this basic change in the employment in that industry, in 1972, paid $50 an hour. When unions were strong, when the minimum wage reflected true cost of living in America and kept pace with inflation, when people were paid for the value of their work and could live lives of dignity in this country, our economy was even stronger then than it is now today. So I believe that we can afford it. And I know from past history that at least when we've done it in the past, we have been able to afford it. And I think the alternatives for me are unbearable. And those are asking people to work the 2 or 3 jobs to make ends meet. Now, to the spirit of your question, I agree that it will not just be the minimum wage that addresses this issue. It is health care, it is paid family leave, it is addressing our criminal justice system that locks people up and out of the economy and employment altogether. We have to work on those other dynamics as well. But I do think we got to raise that minimum wage. Sir, and I think, Cynthia, is this our last question? Okay.
My name is Alexander Short. I was wondering, what are your plans for lowering prices for pharmaceutical companies?
Yeah, so here's one of the great indignities and injustices in American history. You and I and every American taxpayer has paid for the pharmaceuticals and medications that are sold back to us at the highest prices on the face of the planet today. We paid for them in the initial research and development, in the clinical trials, in buying them for Medicaid, Medicare, VA, and TRICARE beneficiaries, and yet we are paying exorbitantly high prices. Why is that? It is because those corporations have access to the lawmakers by the outcomes of the legislation that keeps those prices artificially high. Right now in the United States of America, we still have people dying of diabetes. Though insulin was developed 97 years ago, by scientists in Canada who sold it to their government for $3 Canadian. They didn't want profit, they just wanted to save the lives of people. And in America today, we're losing lives because we have failed to stand up for one another. So how do we do this differently? One, we allow Medicare to negotiate the price of medications, which drives down the cost throughout the system. That's not being allowed today. We will allow it in our administration. Two, we allow you to buy from Canada or from the European Union or Japan or other countries who have a high standard of testing and quality for pharmaceutical medications, but pay much lower prices. Three, we get universal, guaranteed, high-quality health care for everyone in America. The economies of scale also drive down total cost, ensuring that you can afford medications. Under our proposal, Medicare for America, there would be no copay for life-saving medications like insulin. You could just focus on being healthy, being well enough, learning in school, and not worried about crowdfunding the insulin payments that some people are doing today in this country. So that's how I would meet that challenge, and we cannot do so soon enough because there are people's lives literally on the line. Thank you for asking the question. Thank you all for having me up. Very, very